Hi, friends. It's Heidi M., and I'm joined this afternoon virtually from Sundance by composer. Actually, you're a multi-talented person, Todd Griffin, also known as T. Griffin. Welcome. Nice to virtually
Hi,
meet you.
great to be here.
So I know that you said Todd is good to call you by, but your professional name is T. Griffin, and T. Griffin is a songwriter, composer, producer. You do a lot of great things when it comes to music. What was your array into this side of the world in terms of working in music
In terms of working in films,
and in film? Yes.
yeah. Well, so I actually was trained as an actor, and I was doing theater and film stuff as an actor, but also making music as a sort of a songwriter and kind of experimenting with different ways of producing my songs. Sort of on the side. This is the sort of early 2000s, maybe, and I was in a play in which the director asked me if she could use some of my music as like transitional things in the play, some instrumental music I had sort of kicking around, and I said sure. And one of the other actors in the play was his wife was a film editor, and she took that music and started cutting it into a movie that she was editing. And they tried to hire a real composer, and for whatever reason, it didn't work out. And they,
Hmm.
whoever had the idea was, well, maybe we should just hire that guy because obviously he can do something. And so I ended up scoring this whole movie with zero idea what I was doing, but I just a great experience. And so that's 25 years ago now. So
Wow.
I've been involved in this side of the music, that long, though probably for the last 12 or 15 years, primarily concentrating on film scores.
Hmm. What a great stumble into this world, right?
Yeah.
And congratulations, you've been a staple at Sundance for a number of years. We're gonna get into your films at this year's Sundance, but in my research, I realized that you also have released music on your own. How do you balance these two worlds of making music for film and then also for yourself?
Yeah, well, so I don't. Um, I don't anymore, or I don't right now.
Mm.
Basically, I was doing both for a long time, where I would score, three or four movies a year, maybe two or three movies a year, and then also be, releasing music and playing with um, different projects. I played with the singer Vic Chesnut for quite a while,
Mhm.
and then toured with my band, the Quavers, up until about 2012. And around the time I had a kid, it became clear that it was fairly untenable to maintain that lifestyle. And I had the opportunity to basically do film scoring full time. And that,
Mhm.
was the door that just sort of was open for me at exactly the right time in my life. So since 2012, it's basically been full-time film scoring with
Right.
some, installation projects and other things, but no band touring. My band did one, like a sort of reunion show at Big Ears Festival in 2017, I think.
Mhm.
But since then, it's been film scores. I am, however, I think looking to sort of transition into more of a hybrid existence going forward. So
Nice. Yeah, I could imagine it being very busy for you because looking at your work listings, it's quite extensive, which is great. You work with some really great filmmakers, and it seems like it's always been around relationships, like it's even your first array into scoring a film because people that you know, and it seems that you do kind of work repeatedly with some filmmakers.
yes.
Maybe I want to ask you a little bit about your work for Sundance so that people know what you're representing this year. You're there with two
Sure.
films which are so great and they're nonfiction.
Yes.
It seems, is that something that you lean towards?
It's something that I have leaned towards because those are the people that I know. I mean, I sort of score a lot of documentaries because I score a lot of documentaries. That's the world that I've sort of ended up in. I did a lot more narrative films, 5 or 6 years ago. But partly because those are my relationships, and partly because there's been such an incredible, blossoming, both in terms of like being able to finance documentary films and have a lot of attention on them. But also, I think the aesthetics of documentary have like really pushed over the last 10 years in exciting ways. So it's been a great place for me to be.
Absolutely. So I noticed that you're working with Heidi Ewing and Rachel Grady on Folktales.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, this film is only available in person, friends. So we're gonna have to wait to see if it comes our way soon. But what was it about the story that drew you in? You've worked with them before, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, honestly, Heidi and Rachel could tell me they're doing a movie about a garbage can, and I would say, okay, let's see what happens. So, I didn't have to be convinced to work on it. Everything that they do with a kind of rigor and ambition that just it's just super exciting for me. But I was, sort of, because we've worked. This is our fifth project together, including a series in there. So we've made, a lot of minutes
Hmm.
of movies. Um, I was aware that they were shooting this thing, and so I would see footage when they would come back and stuff, and so I feel like I was kind of like, part of the process, almost from the beginning.
Right,
It's a
right.
2 year process of the film, and the themes of the film just really resonated to me.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I understand that you learned to play some interesting instruments for this score.
I did. So one of the things that was really just brought me a lot of joy in terms of this project was, it's set in the upper Arctic Norway,
Hmm.
and it wasn't something that, I'm actually Swedish by extraction, but it wasn't like Scandinavian music, anything like that has never been an interest at all of mine.
Hmm.
But I was connected with this player, a woman named Zosha Warpea, in Brooklyn, and she became fascinated and ended up with studying this Norwegian violin sort of variant,
Hmm.
called, for her, the one she plays is called the Hardanger Damor. But it's basically a violin with a set of drone strings underneath it. So you have the note, but then you also have this kind of like, it's like ethereal cloud of other resonances around the note. And it's just,
Hmm.
she made a solo record called Silver Dawn, and that I was totally struck by and became in love with. So I became was interested in her as a player and also this instrument. So I hired her as like a consultant, and she brought to me all of this different sort of Nordic traditional music. She had spent 2 years in Norway on a Fulbright studying all of this stuff. So I used her as a resource and just was connected with all of these different sort of contemporary pieces of music that I had never been aware of. So uh, I didn't learn to play the hardanger fiddle, but she told me about another instrument called the I'm going to say it, but this is not the pronunciation. It's like the Sveldeflöte, which is a flute that just has two holes. There's no like holes that you play with your fingers. You just hold it and blow in it. And by closing the bottom hole and blowing at different rates, you get different notes. And I was like, oh, that sounds like really hard to play, but I'm going to get one and just mess around with it. And it actually became very easy, like I had a really good time learning it. So that became the instrument. Those two instruments really became the focus of the score instrumentally.
And right, so because the film itself is set in sort of a location around the border of Norway and Russia, so a little remote for
A
folks.
lot remote.
A lot remote for folks to orient themselves. So this is what we're picturing the landscape to be, and the story around being in nature, like young people in nature. So you mentioned that you worked kind of along the way as the filmmakers were making the film. What
Yep.
was that? How long would that process be? Do you tend to be involved through the entire duration of it, even in post?
Yeah, well, so with this one, I probably started making music in the spring, at which point they probably had an assembly of the film. Maybe it was June or so, but they showed me an assembly of the film, and so I met the characters who are these high school students, basically doing this wilderness year in the Arctic Circle, right? And so they're really sort of amazing characters, and just the footage of this landscape is just like unforgettable. So that was my initial like sort of introduction to, let's just sort of the movie. And I made a bunch of music just kind of messing around, like trying to record with these different instruments, like
Right.
just playing around with different ideas. And
Mhm.
a lot of that initial sort of test music ended up in the movie. There was sort of like a brief like bunch of music I made at the beginning that I handed over while they were editing it that they edited with, and that became really the spine of the score.
Hmm. And it's interesting because your second project, which is Middletown, also involves
Mm,
young people, but this
yeah.
is from the 1990s, and now they're going back to see how a film that they worked on kind of uncovers some interesting issues around toxic waste in their community. And how, and this is by Jesse Moss and Amanda McBain. I had a chance to sneak peek that film, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
So I want to know kind of, was there a difference in how you approach this, or it's just it's a different story, so you kind of just go with that?
Well, so Jesse and Amanda are also a filmmaking duo that this is also my fifth project with them. So I've done a lot of work with both of these directors, and I started it very differently, but also exactly the same. I did a lot of research, which was fun. And for this, it was kind of like research on early 90s radio music, which was just, yeah, it's just super fun. It was just like a fun time in music. It was great to uncover a lot of stuff that I had sort of listened to back then. And the Middletown is a much more of a the themes are very similar, but the approach is much different. There's almost sort of a Stranger Things element to it, where there's this monster in this small town, which kind of only the kids can see, or only certain people can see. So there's sort of a way that the genre, history in movies also plays a part in the construction of this film, and then in the construction of the score for it. And with Middletown, it was, I think it was fairly clear we were interested in something pretty electronic, pretty like pop oriented, like, or at least, whatever, not classical music, and I watched like a bunch of like David Lynch score like films, and so like really pay attention to the score. And I watched Stranger Things and Yellow Jackets and a lot of these things that have needle drop and stuff that references these specific time periods, in a way that's it's kind of delightful. So that was my approach. It was, in a way, you know Folktales is about these young people stepping into adulthood,
Hmm.
divorced from a lot of the electronic media that defines our consciousness so much of the time, and that's really one of the main themes of that film. In Middletown, it's really, there's these kids are stepping into adulthood and into having voices as, like, members of society, using these early digital tools. I mean, these
Yes.
camcorders. I guess they're VHS. I mean, but anyway, so it's just it's sort of two sides of the same thing, where they're actually the electronic journalism of it, the sort of the digital mediation of it. It gives them a voice and power. So yeah, they're interesting, kind of like balance.
There was an interesting balance when I was reading about the two films for sure. And I like what you mentioned in terms of referencing Stranger Things, and sometimes kids are seeing something that adults are just not able to grasp, right?
Yeah,
And it's so poignant sometimes in our youth,
yeah.
developing our sort of activist bones there. And so when your approach with films like these two, they're
Mhm.
nonfiction, somewhat similar. Did you have any idea that they were going to be, were they around the same timeline, actually, is what I want to know.
Well, so not. I mean,
For you, I
they
mean.
were they overlapped somewhat. I was working. I was basically finishing Folktales while I was starting Middletown. I mean, I worked on Middletown, for a fair amount of time, but really intensively not until kind of close to Thanksgiving. So that was sort of a faster process overall. But when I'm usually working on multiple things at once, and I'm very like interested and excited by rules in scoring. And so I had very specific rules about the instruments I was using,
Right.
for the two films. So if I was working on them sort of simultaneously, I still had totally like different stations that I was like going to work on the music.
Very interesting. I love that. So you now have been sort of in our relationship attending Sundance for a number of years. You were
Mhm,
also part of that lab a few years
mhm.
ago. What's this experience been like for you over the years to be part of this great film? Some of them really well received films over the years and be part of this environment?
Yeah, well, so I mean, I have been coming to Sundance now for 16 years, and I've had a film here every year since whatever that is, 2009.
Mhm.
Um, and my relationship with Sundance started with the Sundance Composers Lab, and that was that changed my relationship with Sundance, but it also changed my entire career. There's no substitute for those kind of like those sort of lab situations for artists. And I had applied for the Sundance Composers Lab for 5 years running until I got in. It was very difficult to get in. And it was a program where they brought together filmmakers, producers, and composers, and then mentors, like really well-known directors, really well-known filmmakers, really well-known producers, and then really well-known film composers. And so we kind of got to learn from the best, but also really create a peer network. So the people, the directors, the other composers, the producers that I met, in 2008, I guess that was, are still part of my life. And my position as an alumni at the Sundance Composers Lab made coming to Sundance much, much easier every year. And that lab is no longer happening, but I hope that they'll resuscitate it. It was kind of a casualty of COVID, and I think a lot of that stuff they're trying to bring back.
Absolutely. I think we're slowly trying to get back to some of the more usual components of the fests. And I
Exactly.
understand you did a panel this year. Was it yesterday?
Yeah, yesterday.
How was that?
It was great. It was great. Really fun conversation.
Right. I find that people are more curious these days in terms of everything that goes around putting a film together. It's not just about, the story. It's also all the other elements. So
Yeah, for sure. It was a great, lot of great questions. Yeah, a lot of interest in the scoring process, and I'm sure the other panels have been similar.
for sure. I want to ask you about two films that are really two of my favorites that I just reminded myself that you worked on.
Mhm.
El Equipo and La Camioneta, two
Oh wow, yeah, yeah.
that I love for different reasons. And are there any sort of, I don't think it's a fair question to ask of anyone, but are there any kind of films that stay with you? Like these two films have stayed with me over the years because
Mm,
of the subject matter, but also the way that they're shot, they're really beautifully done and edited, and everything just
mhm.
makes them really stellar. But for you, what are some of the films that stay with you, or the works that stay with you?
Well, yeah. So I mean, both of those films I just love that, and I'm glad you mentioned like Kipo because that was a great, really sort of exciting project for me. But La Camioneta was probably I don't know 2010. It was one of my earlier scores, and it that was one that people sort of pull out of my work as something that I don't know I find it in like temp scores of a lot of movies that I'm talking to directors about, and that one was also a really wonderful research project because it's actually set in Guatemala, but I had a number of Colombian musicians that I was working with a lot at the time, and that was music that I just really really loved, the sort of traditional cumbia from Colombia. Um, and so I got to work with a lot of those musicians within the context of that score, and I really started developing a practice of doing film music before I was really scoring the picture. That is, I did long recording sessions where we kind of just played different variations of these theme ideas I had, and then I assembled the score afterwards from those recordings. And that was the first movie that I did that with. I really sort of took on that process as the sort of center of the way I was working on that one.
Oh, how interesting. Very cool. I'm from Guatemala. That's also why that
Oh,
film
okay.
hit my heart. But I
Yeah,
also
yeah,
love
yeah.
that journey, right? It's such a road
It's so
film.
great. It's so great. Yeah, I love that film so much.
But you worked with other notable films. But you also mentioned you've worked on series. What's
Mhm.
that energy like? Is there a change in how you work for a series?
Yeah, well, it really depends on who's doing it. But and I've worked on mostly, series that really were conceived of as extended movies. So both Heidi and Rachel, who did Folktales, and Jesse and Amanda, who did Middletown, I've worked on done a series for each of them, um, and it's you're still like kind of trying to capture people's attention and bring it through bring it into this world, and then sort of take care of them throughout this whole journey. I mean, series tend to be scored more thoroughly. Like there's usually a lot more music. There's sort of there's sort of a sense that you always kind of have to make sure you have people's attention because they're watching it on a small screen.
Mhm.
So I think that there's like a difference in the way that you know approach maybe sort of underlining the story points, that you're a little more emphatic about it with a series, but it's not a huge difference. I think that people are generally going for sort of cinematic production values, for those longer projects.
Mhm. And how would you, yeah, I can imagine for sure. And how do you keep your own creative juices flowing? Do you gravitate to new music, old music? What is it that kind of influences you and permeates the work?
I mean, I'm a voracious music listener. I love, discovering new music. I love going out to see live music. That definitely informs everything I do, and I always am looking for players to involve in scores. And because I'm in New York and there's so many people around, it's not that hard to arrange a couple sessions with really amazing world class musicians in my studio. And so just the fact that I'm able to do that, I'm grateful for every day. And then I don't really have I never wake up and I'm like, oh crap, I'm out of ideas. I find this work so fun. And there's definitely periods where I'm stuck, but I never feel like kind of out of juice.
For sure. And do you remember the last artist that you've listened to recently?
Well, okay. So, I mean, I went and saw this band. It's the guitar player Jeff Parker, who his guy's sort of a jazz practice. He was in the band Tortoise, which I'm not super familiar with that material, but he's got this jazz quartet, the maybe it's just the Jeff Parker Quartet. Anyway, they've done a number of records that were just improvisation, long form improvisation, before 20-minute pieces from this one certain bar in LA. But anyway, I got to see them play. They just have incredible like cohesion in the way they play together. That's such a pleasure to hear, like recorded, and
Yes.
was infinitely more pleasurable to hear live. So I got to see them in a little club in New York, probably one of their first times out of LA, maybe a month or so ago, and is very minimal music. So the change, they're not like shredding, they're not like making super like impressive music, but it's impressive in its attention to detail, and it's just was such a pleasure to hear. So.
That's so great. Thank you for sharing that. I was actually listening to some of your work in the last 2 days, and I'm like, oh, this
Mhm.
is great. I'm working. I'm transported, but at the same time, I can do some research on the side. I want to make sure I say that because people can listen to your stuff. It's available online, Bandcamp,
Yeah,
YouTube, SoundCloud, you
yeah.
name it. Anything exciting that you want to mention before I wrap up? Any projects that you want to shout out?
Uh, well, so I would point people back to actually two artists that I've worked with a bunch, or well, Zosha Warpea, who has this wonderful record, Silver Dawn, and she turned me on to all of these different Nordic musicians. I would say just out of pick a name out of the hat. This guy Nils Auckland, Nilsokland, I think, also plays the Hardanger fiddle, and it's just beautiful solo recordings. And then there's a bassoon player that plays on Middletown, named Joy Gidry,
Yes.
who's making wonderful recordings on her own, and like taking the bassoon into taking the bassoon into the future. And I've worked with her several times, and basically every chance I get. So I'll shout those two things out.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much. A pleasure to speak with you. Congratulations again on Sundance and your work.
Thank you.
We'll
Thank
stay
you.
tuned for the next round.
Okay, sounds good. Take it easy.
Thank you.
All right. Bye bye.